When his wife approached me saying Carl was desperate to resume his Buddhist practice, but needed guidance, I jumped in. At that time, Charles Grand was held in a federal prison. Perhaps, although I did not reason this out at the time, visiting Carl was a shallow foray for me into the dangerous waters inhabited by Charles Grand. I was not yet ordained by Thich Nhat Hanh, and I was still a practicing Quaker. All Quakers are ministers, so I was permitted to visit Carl as a religious counselor. Carl was glad to see a friend, someone he could ask about his kids, how they were getting along. And he was ardently interested in Tibetan Buddhism, so he had once lived in Nepal. And so I brought him books. I offered to sit with him in the visiting room, which was more like a closet with a window, while just outside the halls echoed with the ubiquitous slamming doors, booming PA system, raucous yells, and mumbled epithets. With prison ambiance as the ground of our meditation, we practiced together the posture and breathing which were giving me so much relief. I took a small bell like that one. I was able to bring him some books on Tibetan Buddhism, soft cover only, because you could smuggle drugs or a weapon in a hardcover book. We relished our shared silence. Carl began meditating alone in his cell. He began to see his jail time as an opportunity to find peace and light, as a kind of liberation. After about a year of visits from me, Carl said, "I'm having some difficulty keeping the discipline without a group, a sangha, to encourage me." And there were no Buddhist services at County Town at that time. I told him I would check to see what the prison would allow. And the chaplain, it turned out, was Methodist. I explained to him that I combined my Quaker and Buddhist practice as a kind of double belonging, but that I spring from Methodist roots and am ever grateful to my Methodist forebears for giving me a strong sense of devotion to God, the sacredness of place, and the poetry of the scriptures, which we enjoyed so much this morning, didn't we? I further explained that my husband, also a Quaker and Zen practitioner with Southern Baptist roots, did not want me to lead the group alone, so he committed to join us. We planned a weekly mindfulness practice class of an hour and a half. After a meeting with the deputy director of treatment, who was very enthused, I was surprised. He said, "This could be big, could be really big." We began with a poster with the headline that read, "Still the mind and open the heart." I swallowed hard when I wrote those words, "open the heart," as frankly I still harbored a prejudice that most convicts are hard-hearted thugs who would scoff at the idea of opening their hearts. But I wrote it anyhow, and I'm glad I did, because 10 men signed up for our first class. I couldn't believe it. Finally, the night arrived, and the system for calling the men up does not always work, even when they have passes. Some of you who have been in prisons may know this. So there were, how many people have done prison work? Yes. Yeah, okay. So, you know what I'm talking about. So there were only 4 men with us on that first night. Carl read a passage on Tibetan Buddhism, and we shared sitting meditation and walking meditation. I'll never forget the gardenia that night. A friend had brought me a fresh blossom to lay on our altar at home. On a whim, we took the creamy flower with its waxy green leaves and laid it on the table in the prison's small, close room. Its fragrance served as our incense, since actual incense would be, of course, verboten. I felt chills as some of the men told us they had known Charles Grand, one of them at Ridge High School, several from the early days when he was held in County Town. One man, Calypso, in a voice like a cement mixer, shared with us that he was a Vietnam vet, that he had committed countless atrocities. Because of this, he told us he had suffered deeply and continuously. And we were this morning talking about the veterans and the suffering of the veterans that many of us have worked with. He often became obsessed with thoughts of homicide or suicide, but he truly wanted to put the war behind him and find peace. How was this man, I asked myself, different from Charles? Yet there I was with Calypso, offering the teachings of peace. Absorbed by the prison sounds as the ground of our being, we found inner harmony in the power of the group. As we made ready to leave the prison that first night, we passed the gardenia around our meeting table. Each man inhaled its sweetness, touched its tender petals and leaves. I cherish a mental photo of Calypso with his nose in the flower, Calypso and the Buddha, Calypso and the Christ. I can still smell that gardenia. Still, even as my fear of entering the prison began to abate, I had bad days when prison was just not high on my list of destinations. The recliner beckoned, or my eyes wanted to close. I often resisted the routine that Philip and I had to walk through the metal detector again, or subject ourselves to before the days of airport security, to the handheld metal detector, arms outstretched. I said, this makes me feel like a criminal. Maybe that was a good thing. Sometimes en route in the car, Philip and I bickered. Yet without fail, once we had been in the prison for a time, practicing together, our minds lightened, and there was no distinction between the inmates, the criminals, and us. We always left walking on air. We did not ask the men why they were convicted. We just sat. We just walked. We just smiled. We just beamed out our love. And always there were hugs, goodbye. So I'm going to take a drink and then read to you of the part of the chapter called Forgiveness. Oh no, it's okay, I don't mind holding it. I like to move around. It was autumn, near the 5th anniversary of my family's death date, October 15. I picked up a pencil, my therapy. Out of Zen's rich tradition of meaning surrounded in silence, I breathed in. With a heavy heart, I began writing a poem about the night of the murders, trying to sort out my feelings. I had been practicing at that point seated meditation daily for 5 years. I was diligent in my practice. That was the work. I was doing the work. By then I had become a disciple of Thich Nhat Hanh, who wrote in one of his poems, "I am the frog swimming happily in the clear waters of my pond, and I am the grass snake who, approaching in silence, feeds itself on the frog. I am the child in Uganda, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks, and I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda." And I was using the scriptures, and what happened to my absolute shock as I wrote the poem was that I began to identify with the rage of the boy who was stabbing and bludgeoning Alan and Bobby, killing and raping their mother, dear Connie. But God was there. God was there. Suddenly in the writing, I seemed to inhabit his body. I felt blind, out of control, out of my own body and mind. I went numb. I felt only rage, hatred, and stabbing my pounding heart. That was the day I stopped thinking of Charles as a beast and began thinking of him as a boy in whom something had gone horribly wrong. The pain of resentment vanished. Breathing in, I saw in me the seeds of murder. And there's more on this in the book. I tell about an abortion. Seeds which simply have not been watered. Breathing out, I saw that the seeds of murder in me have withered. Still they're there. And I saw within me not only the victims, my family, but the perpetrator and his family. So that was the turn. So I think it takes a kind of transformation, a letting go to God, whatever that might be. That was the turn. And sadly, before I summoned the courage to tell Charles that I had forgiven him, he took a laundry bag and hung himself to death in his prison cell. 12 years after the murders, his mother Trina and I cried together over our mutual loss. And mine was the first telephone call the family had received in 12 years from anyone in the family, anyone who knew them, any friends, anyone. First phone call, she told me. They had become total pariahs. So the last part of the prison work, bending to enter the conference room where we held meditation at Countytown Prison, Joshua darkened the doorway. He did not stand, he loomed. Joshua was a scary-looking 6'3" or 6'4", over 300 pounds, with a blue anarchist tattoo inked into his shaved scalp. It was a Thursday evening in the second year of our weekly visits to Countytown. A Zen master's warning flashed through my mind, and I've heard Alex refer to this too. Don't leave a drunk or a bum outside the monastery gate. You might be excluding Lord Jesus. We did not ask about his jail time. It was not until much later, standing in my living room in North Carolina with Josh, that I learned he was a sex offender. Not long after he began his prison sentence, the doctors had diagnosed him with schizophrenia and placed him on antipsychotic drugs. There are so many mentally ill in our crowded prisons. Perhaps because of the heavy drug dosages, he was a mouth breather, adding to his sinister aura. Hugging practice had become a ritual. Since inmates are ordinarily denied the luxury of human touch, I wondered how many of them attended meditation just for the motherly and fatherly hugs that Philip and I enjoyed with them before saying goodbye each week. It was not we who initiated the hugging, it was the men. These streetwise youngsters whose personalities morphed the moment they walked out the door of the conference room and returned to the prison halls, their street. Out would pop the exaggerated swagger of boys who had not been properly fathered. The street jive. Thus I began to look deeply at some of the peer pressures on these men, as I got to know them as real and vulnerable and in some ways innocent. My fears abated, and I felt less of a separation between us. At the close of the first year at Countytown, 4 inmates were growing solid in their meditation and mindfulness practice. Big Joshua was one of them. Over the months that he attended weekly meditation, I watched with utter happiness as he took to the practice like an eagle to the air.